give us a little bit of background into your work. I understand you have another website as well, taroscopes.com.
Well, I got 11 websites. Some are on the tarot, some are on astrology, and some feature the books that I've recently put out, starting with The Irish Origins of Civilization. That came out last year, late last year. Came out in November or something like December last year. And then this year, somewhere around June or July, I released another book on astrotheology, so there's websites on that. I'm the producer of a series of DVDs, which is called the Origins and Oracles series, and that was very much a lengthy magnum opus type of thing in which we look into many subjects right across the board, so that instead of tunnel visioning on one area of this sort of labyrinthine study, we tried to cover a great deal, from symbolism to the studying the ancient roots of religion, all the way up to corporate advertising and subversive symbolism, to Atlantis, like you said in your introduction, and so many other fascinating subjects. Because my work, I tend to try and keep it as eclectic as possible, because I think that in order to get clear on what's going on in today's world, you have to find the right perspective. It's like somebody trying to view a canvas. If you're too close to it, you're going to miss something. If you're too far away, you're going to miss something. So it's about adjusting our perspectives so that we can see correctly what is really going on. And secondarily, you need to approach it eclectically from a lot of different angles, because it's not just going to be from party political, perspectives, or some sort of partisan religious perspective. That in fact, those things could very much prejudice your vision when it comes to tracking this whole New World Order Leviathan. So objectivity is absolutely essential. Making up your own mind as opposed to what other people think is very important, and having a smorgasbord of information placed clearly and distinctly in front of you. So this is what my work provides. So, but people can go to my main portal website, which is michaeltsarion.com, and from there they can see all the other websites that I've got, and also see some articles that I wrote last year, and lots of free web streams and free interviews are all posted there, very easily accessible.
Well, I wish we had more time to talk tonight, more than an hour, so we'll do our best with what we have on the table. Now I'm going to just mention a couple headlines to get your take on the economic situation at hand and these calls for a new global monetary system based in China and Russia. So we see this week that the Senate has approved a Wall Street bailout. Meanwhile, the House has passed a $1 trillion defense bill. China banks told to halt lending to U.S. banks. Credit markets frozen as banks hoard cash. Vladimir Putin lashes U.S. for economic failures. Housing crisis creates car sleeper homeless. Police may stop responding to some crimes, is another report. States are now preparing for a home heating crisis. U.S. farmers may face cash flow squeeze. In another headline, severe fuel shortage grips parts of the U.S. Southwest, and the bank bailouts are also coming to Europe, courtesy of the U.S. taxpayers, and European central banks cut sales of gold. So, Michael, what's your perspective on this current economic situation? Things are moving very, very fast now in the matter of days, not months or years.
Sure. There's a countdown situation taking place. It's been speeding up since about the turn of the millennium. At about 2000, a lot of people have predicted that the Illuminati were going to initiate, their so-called New World Order in very hard, obvious terms, and then they were disappointed when that didn't happen, and they couldn't understand that. And it's because, everything has to happen at the right astrological timing. And what we're dealing with now, and it's great that you listed all of that, because that's a good list, and people need to be very savvy. And then behind that, behind the facade of what's happening in the social world, you have, the astrological timing. Last week, and I apologize to audience members, who are listening who have no background in astrology. I won't spend too much time on it. I just want to say anecdotally that the planet Pluto, which rules a lot of upheaval, which rules a lot of deconstruction, and which rules exposure of hidden secrets behind the scenes kinds of things, and which also rules a lot of power struggles, has moved into the sign of Capricorn, and it's going to stay there for about 13 years. Then what we do as astrologers is we take that length of time, 13, divide it into 3 parts, for sort of convenience sake, and we notice right away that makes about approximately 4 years, three periods of 4 years. And of course, that we notice right away then that the first period of 4 years, which started this week, will take us up to 2012. So even if we just, hone in on that first 4 years, we sort of, go microscopic on that, now we can see that we've just entered a cycle which will involve a lot of financial and economic turmoil. It will involve a lot of mergers. It will involve a lot of fallouts. It's people have likened it to the 1929 crisis, and that's partly true. It's a little bit different because America is different. The 1929 crisis was designed because there wasn't a single, perturbance in actual economics going on at the time. There was no valid reason for the depression to have taken place. That was artificially created. That was artificially manufactured by bankers, by people in the federal bank system, in order to annihilate and wipe out the basically the Caucasian, Scots-Irish, heartland people in America who had built America. And so, with the depression of 1929 and the eradication and the sellout of all of those individuals, a good lot of them, where their farms and their businesses were taken away from them, that marked the death of phase 1 of what you might call America's destiny. And then we moved up to the sort of the era of Reagan. People can say, okay, we moved in, with the rise of the neocons and again the super involvement of America in foreign shores, is sort of a phase 2. And right where we are now, right in this period where Pluto has moved in to the sign of Capricorn, leading up to 2012 specifically, we are going to be entering into phase 3 of the world's destiny, phase 3 of America's destiny, but it will be phase 1 of the true New World Order coming in. This thing is a process. It's not something that happens, like people thought is going to happen overnight. It happens very gradually, it happens very slowly, and it has to be in the right sidereal timing. I'm saying this because I want the audience to really understand that there's occult underpinnings, because a person like myself who's aware of these occult underpinnings sees nothing new in anything that's been happening in the last year or in the last 10 years or 50 years. What has been taking place, throughout the world for hundreds of years, encompassing world wars, encompassing the opening of the industrial age, the agricultural age, going back through the Renaissance, going back through the development of the middle classes, the rise of Protestantism, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the rise of Christianity, all of this stuff is part of one movement, which involves the progress of what we would call technology, which of course is peaking right now. We're racing supersonically towards this sort of technological purgatory, the cyber purgatory of tomorrow, and of course we're also in a situation where America is definitely under attack. So the headlines that you're reading, what people are seeing right now, the outsourcing of jobs, the tremendous death of the heavy machinery and heavy labor in America, the sense of the endlessly open borders, which has been a problem for a long, long time, and the giving of amnesty to people who have never worked to bring America to where it is, and yet the fruits of America being handing over to people who don't deserve it. All these things, the introduction of the Amero, the NAFTA, highway, the CAFTA coming in, and now you can add another report to that, Alex. Did you know if you go to YouTube and put in North American Union by 2010, it'll bring you to a Fox Channel report, which has just exposed the fact that the American taxpayers are now going to be paying for the developments in Mexico. Excuse me, it's not Fox report, it's CNN. It's a live report, and it's a report with Lou Dobbs. Go to YouTube, put in North American Union by 2010, and it'll take you to the report that Lou Dobbs did. And it's a investigative report which uncovered documents just very recently that showed that American taxpayers are going to be fitted with a bill to even pay for development outside their borders.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
we're in a tragic situation here in which American people need to wake up and take control of this situation again, because there is a war on America. There's a war to bring that country to its knees and to basically, make the first world a third world, and the third world countries like India and China and Japan and Indonesia rising to the first world status. It's a tipping of the balances, courtesy of Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Kuhn and Loebs and all the rest of them up there in in Washington D.C. and New York.
Well, speaking of the Rockefellers and Bill Gates, for example, the Global Seed Vault is now accepting seeds. They've been building that. Now, ironically, interesting timing of all times in history, Michael. They're ready to start loading them up with the seeds, so they're definitely looking at something in the future. We had a caller that wanted to know about the connection with Saturn. If there was any connections with Saturn that you can speak to.
Yes, there is, and it's a very important one, and that's a very good question. I said that Pluto enters into the sign of Capricorn. Of course, anyone who's familiar with astrology, and it looks like your questioner is familiar with astrology, what is the ruling planet of Capricorn? Well, ask any Capricorn sun sign person, anybody who's a Capricorn, they'll immediately tell you Saturn. So there's a huge connection. And the huge connection is basically that Pluto and Saturn are not necessarily compatible. In astrology, it's all about compatibility, pretty much like it is in physical relationships. And if Pluto was moving through a house, moving through a sign that it was compatible with, we wouldn't have too much of a problem. The effects would be kind of different. This 13-year stint of Pluto going through Capricorn, which is a house that's normally ruled by Saturn, makes that journey very antithetical. And for goodness sake, there's the proof in the pudding, isn't it? As soon as the planet moves into the sign, as soon as it approaches the cusp of the sign of Capricorn, what do we have? We have just a meltdown situation in the economy of America and so many other things, which of course could be sadly a tip of the iceberg, but nevertheless we've seen these repercussions. And Pluto will also be affecting people, in their domestic life, in their relational life, in their relationship with their children, and their relationship with authority figures at work. So it's going to cause a lot of turmoil. The positive side is this, and again, apologies for people who are not familiar with too much of the astrological jargon, but the fact is that Saturn rules certain things. Capricorn symbolizes certain things. They aren't particularly healthy. It's too much of this rigidity. It's too much of this fixity. It's too much of this reliance on authority. It's too much the concept of big daddy. It's too much the concept of projection and living the world in a sensational way and allowing other people to take responsibility for your life. As I said, big daddy and all of these kinds of things. So there's a certain amount of shake-up comes in is positive. Pluto is not something negative. Pluto, the energy that Pluto represents, and this also can be translated in psychological terms, but again, for time, we don't have time to go into that tangent. But so just speaking purely astrologically, the energy that Pluto brings is often very positive. What this is doing is it's dividing people along psychological lines. All of this trauma, all of this stuff, and remember, if people who followed my work will know that I insist that approximately, probably 85% of the trauma that you see occurring in the world is by design. It's actually meant to do that because it's meant to create a person to be autistic. It's meant to make intelligent, rational people, regress to a totally animistic, primitive, fearful, anxious state. I've mentioned this in my work time and time again. So my counter message, always to what's coming, what is happening now, what is going to be happening in the 13 years, or certainly in the countdown to 2012, is that all that is happening is meant to happen to divide people, psychologically. For those people who just cannot find their center, cannot find the still point, are so utterly, shaken by what they see externally happening because they're so outer-directed. And then the other group who legitimately understand that something, awful is happening or these things are taking place, but those people, use that as a catalyst to find their center, as Joseph Campbell said, to find your bliss and to hold on to that place. A good analogy is if you're on some sort of, ship that is just teetering in the waves, is being tempest-tossed, more likelihood you're going to hold on, isn't it? It's at that moment that you're going to grab on and hold tight to something. So sad as it is to say, you see, coming from a spiritual or psychological point of view, all of these political shenanigans that we're seeing going on, all of the conflict that we're maybe going to be experiencing, even in our domestic situation, is actually designed to shake you up enough, and this tracks back to 9/11, especially in an American context, because the 9/11 and the towers being struck with lightning is, struck with these planes is very analogous to the tarot card that we know as the tower struck with lightning, card number 16. A huge, in-your-face physical message of shake-up of that which is phallic, that which is, rigid, that which is calcified, that which is toxic, and a huge message that there needs to be a tremendous, spiritual catharsis, or that we are going through a process of catharsis in the next couple of years. And here we are in 2008, still preceding that. I've always talked in my work about the importance of the cusp point at 2006, late in 2006. Then there's there's another very important, transition period in 2007 and late 2007, and now is the most crucial one that really signals the major changes. And this is Pluto going into the sign of Capricorn. And the very hours, right down to the very hours that this transit is taking place, we find these, happenings. But as I said, no matter what whatever's happening in the political world or in the domestic world or the social world, people, the ones who are awakened, the ones who are going to really be, inheriting any type of a positive future, are those individuals who are going to see this as a wake-up call to them on a psychological and spiritual level. That might mean something quite painful in the interim period. That might mean letting go of a lot of falseness in your life, a lot of false masks, a lot of false people. You can guarantee on that one that a lot of people around you who are just not serving your best interests and who basically are helping to, hide your light, hide your sense of value, self-value, and so on. And so Pluto is a sort of a wake-up call. It's like a clarion call to a return to selfhood, a return to who a person really is, behind the mask, behind the facade, behind the roles, And so that is what's in gear right now, you see. So it just, there's no telling who's going to matriculate, but I've got great faith in the fact that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to get with this and not just, freak out and see this all as something very traumatic.
That's a good point to make, because I think a lot of people will wake up as a result of what they see in the future and the challenges they face. Let me briefly mention a couple headlines pertaining to this crisis with China and Russia and the threat of a third world war. The U.S. threatens punitive measures against Russia. They also say there's a new arms race between Russia and the United States that may trigger Star Wars. Recently, a Russian nuclear bomber flew undetected to within 20 miles of the British coast. Meanwhile, Britain is conducting the largest World War III exercise in history, codenamed Joint Warrior. It's designed to recreate a scenario in which Britain and other sovereign nations go to war against a state-sponsored terrorist movement using a vast array of modern lethal weapons. Also, Russia and Japan are in a joint naval exercise together. We also talked about Russians and Venezuela. Russia to test launch 4 ICBMs by year's end, and also the annexation of the Arctic. They're working on that. China aims to display their military superiority with the new spacewalk. China-Pakistan to enhance military ties. A lot going on, as we see. U.S. urged to bolster missile space defenses against China. And U.S. sends advanced radar systems to Israel in advance of Iran attack. And there's some new information about STRATCOM in Africa. So yeah, that's just from like the last 3 days. Do you think they are manufacturing this third world war, Michael?
Yeah, a lot of this is, this is the media spin, which is not new, and it is, is continually to create an ambiance of fear. That doesn't mean, of course, that these people within the industrial military complex don't play war games. And they don't do these, they need money, right? They want to justify their gigantic budgets. They always think that there's some enemy around the corner. But those people who come from the world I come from, the ones who study what goes on behind the scenes, a little bit more of the conspiratorial aspect, always come across the same information, the same evidence that shows that if there's an enemy out there, that enemy has been manufactured. It is not a legitimate enemy. What we're dealing with here is a geopolitical, sort of game. And, of course, this is very difficult for people to swallow because, again, the traumatized mind is the furthest mind from being able to see reality. That's why my always message is to stop being traumatized, to not let yourself be traumatized so that at least you have a chance of seeing something that, you may not be seeing when you're frightened out of your wits. So what we're seeing here, and this can be corroborated, the very rise of Russia from the time of the Bolsheviks was an experiment created from New York and from London. In fact, the leading Bolsheviks who created the Bolshevik Revolution and who set up the whole Soviet, system over there, were sent out of the Bronx in New York, and were funded by American and British money. So there's a perfect example. And my God, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. When you talk about these manufactured enemies, The real enemy is the human race. Over here, you've got the illumined ones, and then over here, you've got the rest of us. So when you start to see that all these other conflicts, and that doesn't mean that they don't involve bloodshed and all of that, of course they do, but these are things that are orchestrated by psychopaths who don't worry about a bit of bloodshed. In fact, they thrive on it. The point being that all this stuff in the headlines, all this stuff that comes out of the media run by these Knights Templars, Knights of Malta, Teutonic Knights, individuals who are like, sunken in, totally involved with secret orders, secret fraternities. It's not even very hard to prove that because from Henry Luce all the way to Conrad Black and so many others, they're involved with these secret societies that know exactly how to play the game, and they don't want you to know that behind the lodge doors, Protestant and Catholic, Jewish and Muslim, right? Different forms of these conflicts that exist in the world, or let's say Democrat and Republican, Labor and Conservative, mean nothing, zero, nothing. In fact, this can be proven by the fact you just need to look at a list of who the Knights of Malta allow to be initiated into their order. And you will find that it's from extreme left, so-called lefties, case in point is Nelson Mandela, all the way up to, guess who? Hermann Göring, Reich Marshal of the Nazi Party, Benito Mussolini, right, the head fascist dictator of Italy, so forth and so on. So you'd have to ask a question, wouldn't you? My God, this is a great order to belong to, because they don't seem to vet their members in the slightest between from the furthest part of the extremes of the political spectrum. And then you'd ask a further question, say for a moment that you came from the main, from the street, and you were a layman and you didn't know anything about these orders, but you did find out what I've just told you. Well, then wouldn't you want to tap somebody like Nelson Mandela on the shoulder and go, hey, buddy, why are you even attracted to be initiated into an organization, you being a lefty after all? Why would you be wanting to be even accepted? Why would you apply for, why would you receive an award from a group that its historical figures are the world's leading fascists? Ambassadors to Nazi Germany, leading figures of Nazi Germany, leading members of the Ustashi over there in Croatia, and all these sort of henchmen throughout the world are members of. What on earth are you going over there to take their awards for? Of course, answer comes there none, because they have their insider smiles. They're laughing their damn heads off, knowing that, well, that's because you don't understand what's going on, and that I'm no lefty any more than they're any more right-wing. This is a game. This is a game we play in the camera, made for TV, made for media, but behind the lodge doors, we go home to receive our, pats on the back for services rendered from these organizations from which we work. And that goes from the top members of royalty. That is the same fact of the matter for the senior members of the dynastic concerns in Europe. It goes for the venture capitalists who funded pretty much every corporation of standing in America. It goes for the heads of the Russell Trust, who pretty much own America. It goes for the Skull and Bones, people in Yale University and the Bohemian societies. And it goes for all the other little menials that they have employed in the banks, in the credit unions, in the schools, in the judiciary, in the medical field, in the publishing field, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way down to your Oprah Winfrey's and all the way down to the talking heads that you see on TV every night. And if they're not in those organizations, they want to be. They're either trying to get into these secret societies and matriculate by doing what they're told, or they're whimpering and crying because they haven't yet been able to matriculate into it. And any good journalist, I'm talking to the choir, you know this as well as I do, any mainstream good journalist that stands up against this mess, people like the old Morton Downey, and people like that, they're canceled. Their shows are wiped out. You're never going to see them again. And they are easily to replace, on the media with the talking heads. And what is their job? These are people who serve the highest ministers on the pyramid. And their job is merely one job, and that is to continually pump out not only disinformation to us, so that we have no clue about what history really is, and more importantly, is to keep on injecting trauma, wars, rumors of wars, you see, until a person is so frightened, so paralyzed with fear, that he loses his center and becomes psychologically putty in their hands to be manipulated. People don't go and pick up Gore Vidal's books. People don't go and pick up the book Death by Government. to find out that governments have killed more people in their own lands, right, than they've ever killed foreign enemies. So all these wars and rumors of wars, oh my God, what's going to happen in Iraq tomorrow? Oh my God, what's going to happen in Iran tomorrow? Go and find out the facts that governments killed on record throughout the histories. It's been written about. Whatever they're doing in foreign shores, they do at home first or eventually. And we are the enemy. We are the enemy.
Michael,
We got a global village. You've read those headlines. Global village is what is coming down on us. The scared, frightened, toxic individual is going to then be screaming out to Big Brother, you see, to hand them this number so they can be stamped, indexed, cataloged, and safe in the global village. That's what's coming down. And the price over people's head is if you don't accept this, then we'll devastate your country. We'll make you a third world country. This is the sword of Damocles, the carrot and the stick approach that has worked for centuries to such great effect.
Yeah, we'll be the new Africa. Michael, a lot of people go, I don't understand this whole system and what you're saying. Surely it's just about money, but it seems to be about something even larger than that. Can you speak to the psychology of this New World Order and where you see the New World Order coming from historically from your research?
Well, the first part of the question I can certainly answer, and that is that it's not about money as you get further up the pyramid, because the people in control, the true power brokers, the true sort of cadre, the all-seeing ones at the very top of the penthouse, they've been billionaires from the time, of the first centuries AD. I mean, there's no shortage of money in these people's banks. They own all the mineral rights. I mean, just like the British royal family own all the quartz crystal mines in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they own all the concerns of money. Their henchmen run De Beers, run the Oppenheimer Trusts, run Bayer Corporation. You see, any corporation that's been around for more than 50, 100 years is in their pocket already. This white market, so-called stock exchanges, so-called, Wall Streets and so on, is just a white market casino to make you believe in these rags to riches stories, like, an ordinary guy like you or I, can do well, and a corporation, a little company can, make it on the white market and so on. But anyone who studied history or studied politics or economics for 5 minutes knows that that white market, little Fortune 500 lie up there, has no meaning at all. It's the black market, which is not what people think. It's not just guys selling drugs on the corner. It's a huge international, cartel that stretches from Odessa to Dubai and into America, you see, and all over the place. This huge black market is where the money really is and where all of the corruption really is. But that's where the big cash is, and that's where the great diamond merchants and gold bullion merchants and white slavery and drugs, you see, is all part of. We're never taught about this black market, and we just made to look like lone assassins, lone cartels pushing drugs. We're not shown the entire network, you see, of all of this chicanery that's been going on. But getting back to what you're saying, and I want to bring up a very important point about, again, to prime people for what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, and what's happening now, is that, you see, again, these people who sit on the sort of a higher level, they're untouched by all of this. Money is not their concern. Oil is not their concern. Not even so much territory is their concern. But these individuals are sort of like heads in a jar. They need the arms and the legs of the ordinary, Rumsfelds and Obamas and McCains and Cheneys and Bushes and Thatchers and Heaths. And now we got Gordon Brown and we got Blair. You see, all these potentates that we see in the media are their sort of lieutenants. And every so often, every 15, 20, 30 years or so, these lieutenants need to be fed. It's like throwing buns to the bear. It's like time to feed the lizards. We got to feed the reptiles, because they want a kickback for services rendered. And many of these people, when they're in public office, and that could be for periods of 4 to 8 years, they can't really take the kickbacks when they're involved in public office. But after about 10 to 15 years, you see, they want a chunk. And there's only one cake that they can eat off, and that's called the world. So when you see a lot of this, taking down of Iraq and taking down of Iran, and there is the question of oil and the question of territory, Never forget that it's only for these lower minions, these lower sub-dynastic concerns, these lower oligarchs with a small o, but they have run around and they've run the shop for the higher concerns, right? So these involve MEPs. It involves, these party people in the Labours and Conservative, and as we said, behind closed doors, behind the large doors, none of these divisions mean a thing at all, and this can be proven. In American context, it certainly means the people in the Senate, because 100% of those people are corrupt. And the judiciary, you see, and all across the board, right down to the police chiefs and mayors and the media tycoons and all of this. These people want something for their services rendered. And and of course Big Brother wants to feed the dogs, because you don't want these people to become disgruntled and start blowing the whistle. And secondly, these elites have kept records of these families, because isn't it going to be the sons and daughters, all of these families, that continue down the years to serve the higher echelon? So it's very good to feed the doggy, feed the puppy now, because feed the vulture, because it's going to get a little bit antsy if you don't. And secondly, we want its ugly offspring, its filthy spawn, to serve us down the line, you see, down the future. And you do that, the smart way to do that is to make sure that, these people are well and taken care of. And you see many movies dealing with this, especially, I think it's Damien 3, the Omen 3, has some really horrible aspects, stupid aspects of that movie, but there's also some very brilliant aspects of that movie. And if you go and watch that movie again, you'll see this whole payment process of how one group, one tier, funds and looks after the other, and yes, it is about money, and it is about oil, and it is about territory, and it is about privilege on that level, to the sick, conformist, pedophiliac, often, just basically corrupt lower mafia. So right now what you're seeing in the world is that the New World Order is being birthed. It actually may not actually kick in until after 2012. But in the countdown process, what you're seeing now is a rise in local corruption. You're seeing a vulture hunt now. It's perfectly explained if you get the movie that Sam Peckinpah did. It's called The Wild Bunch. In the first, I think, 20 minutes of that movie, you get exactly what I'm talking about, where the bounty hunters are literally digging bullets out of the corpses to compare them one another to prove this is mine, so his boots is mine, his gold teeth is mine, his leather jacket belongs to me, and keep your damn hands off, because, and if you don't believe me, I'll dig out the bullets to prove that it was my gun that shot him. And so this unbelievable, dance macabre is taking place, in which they can all sense the blood. They can smell the blood. The vultures can smell the blood. They can smell the death of America. And see, once that frenzy, that shark frenzy begins, you start getting these headlines. Some of them are legit, some of them are not. But, far more than just those headlines, you're dealing with a massive kill. And a great, a creature like America does not fall, right away. And it's one hell of a spectacle when it falls. And so these little maggots, these little filthy rats that have been plotting America's death since the beginning, and who finally, during the period of, one can argue about that, but I would say certainly by the time of Roosevelt, this is Franklin Roosevelt, and certainly by the time of, the names are so pernicious I can barely bring them out, barely speak them, but by the time of Woodrow Wilson, you see, and Truman, and these kinds of monsters, you're starting to see the decline taking place with the Bretton Woods Agreement and the League of Nations, you see, and the New Deal, and all these new covenants, and the bombing of Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, and all the rest of it. All of these kinds of things, it begins then. It begins then, the slow decline and the destruction coming through the Depression, the rise of the federal government, the rise of the Federal Reserve, and the death of, like I said, the heartland, white Anglo-Saxon people of America who built the bloody country. They had to be eradicated, because on the back of those people you can't bring in phase two. It's not possible to bring in the phase two, you see, of open borders and unlimited outsourcing, and basically the death of the middle class cannot be brought in if the original project, the original experiment, was to continue. So this is what we have to be aware of, is now that there's a licking of the lips every time one of these great transition points take place, and after the vulture is gorged, after the vampire is gorged, There's a merrymaking, and these people have hidden behind the gates. They've hidden behind the veils, and despite the fantastic work of the Eustace Mellinses and the G. Edward Griffins, and despite the whistleblowing from senators and from even governors and from police chiefs and from military generals, this is the work I've collected all my life. We have the proof, we have the evidence. From clergymen, even you see, who worked on this to expose these corruptions within the financial institutions and whatnot. All of these people are closing ranks now, and this is how you again gut. This is how you vampirize. This is how you eviscerate the country, and this is what we're heading towards. So that when the New World Order finally comes in, and it's many threads coming together. But what happens now is the sharks can smell the blood, and they all are so hungry for a piece of the world pie, you see. So this is what is happening now. It's time to feed the sharks,
Michael, I want to go over briefly what you think is going to happen in the years running up to 2012 and what you think 2012 is all about. But before we do that, there's this other equation that I have a big question mark in my head, and many others, as to why all the obsession with genetic mutation, manipulation, DNA ownership, eugenics, the modernization, the changing the ownership even of life itself. Where do you think that quest is deriving from?
Well, this is an excellent question, and we have a DVD coming out very shortly called Architects of Control, and the title of it's actually a series, and the first DVD in that series, it's a documentary film, and it's called The Future of Mankind. It's called Mass Control and the Future of Mankind. It's dedicated to people like Jim Keith. It's dedicated to people like Ezra Pound. Again, these great researchers in America who tried to warn what was going on. And our main focus there, we try to deal with many subjects to answer that question about what's happening in the countdown to 2012 and beyond. But the main theme that interests me in that is that this technology that you're talking about, and this whole idea of the genetics, the genetic manipulation that I believe is very age-old, but is again coming to the fore. And more importantly, why is it that all these genetic companies and all of these people who are the big heads, the big brains, sort of promoting all of this, why are they constantly using symbolism from these same secret societies we mentioned a few minutes ago? What's going on here? That the first genetic experiments were done in the Templar, Templar areas of Scotland, and all the way down to the logos, all the way down to this weird cryptic symbolism that is involved in the experiments themselves, right into the whole mystical question of what is DNA anyway. Coming out of the school of people like Bruce Lipton, to even question, are we even being given a legitimate understanding of what genetics is, or are we being lied to on that level, you see? Very important question. But more importantly is this spiraling down to what these highbrow scientist technotronic types, these cyber pundits are telling us, is of course we're hurtling towards what? A utopia. But you see, unfortunately, the word utopia, which has been used by Francis Bacon and is now being promised to us, this sort of cyber utopia that we're all meant to just upload into and plug right into, is it going to be that? Because the word utopia, the etymology is interesting. It actually means no place. And of course, this might be then a subtextual message to say, yeah, it is no place. What we're dealing with here now is the organic computer. What we're dealing with here now is the organic brain. They may put that before us as some sort of global brain, as some sort of marvelous utopian concept tying into the global village, in which is endless safety, endless security, a virtual reality space in which all your fantasies can be met. And of course, believe me, the people who are disengaged from their own selfhood, which we discussed a little bit earlier, we may be lining up for this. So absolutely, there has already been manipulation of our genetics in the past. This is what my first book on Atlantis goes into. A very controversial book that looks at the original, that man, all of us, may be having part alien, part human DNA. There's even evidence coming out almost every month that sort of corroborates this, that there's something bizarre about happening with the DNA. That book also looked into the origins of evil. But in a modern context, my God, people are starving in the streets, as you said. People are walking around without a home, without a shelter. People are living in their vans. Middle-class people are now having to live in tent cities. And yet billions upon billions are being put into this, technological research. huge amount of money, huge amount of stuff going on. I mean, let's not even talk about America's problems could be solved if America just stopped funding places like Israel. I mean, that's a 2-hour show right there. But let's, back up and just say, okay, wait a minute, what about all the funding that's going into all this technical stuff? What is going on here? You know what I mean? They've scaled back on the Star Wars to a certain extent. They've scaled back on the moon projects, and that's suspicious to say the least. But now we have all of this genetic stuff. First it was nuclear war, first it was atomic war, first it was Cold Wars that they frightened us with, you see. And now the whole thing has shifted overnight, and now we're into a totally different kind of nuclear, biological, atomic setup. We're into nanotechnologies. We're into virtual realities, We're into robotics and cybernetics. And you just wonder, my God, where did the money come for all of this? Aren't there better, more important concerns? Mm-hmm. So my focus is on the psychology of that. Why is it that this is coming about? Because in all my work, I look at consciousness. I look at all the stuff that's happening to us in the theater of the world. Is there something we're doing in our thinking that brings it about? Is it just external stuff that happens in the theater of the world, and then we're sort of passive? Or are we, on some primal, primitive, psychological level, you see, bringing about these conflicts? Is this because we're divorced from center? And is this because we're not owning our own emotions, and owning our own sort of selfhood? And one component of that is that if in fact that is the case, and if man is getting more and more toxic every day, and the only cures for his problem are merely gimmick cures which make the problem worse, i.e. New Age movement and religion, and if man just keeps on spiraling further down into psychopathy, into spiritual toxicity, and this was predicted by Freud, by Jung, by Goethe, by Tennyson, by Crowley, by so many other people have spoken about this. They've warned. John Keats warned about it. There hasn't been a figure of importance philosophically. Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, all of these people warned society that this was going to happen. Kierkegaard, back in the 18th century, my God, was talking about the death of the self, and man being a stranger to himself, and man living on the surface of himself. So are we actually getting ready for this technological, purgatory, this super post-human, what's now being called the post-human world, in which we're just dying to end our humanity? And that what we're going to encounter after 2012 is not the end of nature or the cosmos. Of course, that's preposterous. And it's not the end, perhaps, even of the planet Earth. But it is certainly the end of all that constitutes humanness as we know it. And anyone with the eyes to see even needs to look out the window today. And you can see that what we call humanness absolutely eroding away. It's been doing that even from the 70s, 80s. It was a slow process. Probably people didn't see it back then. But anyone, with even the lowest IQ could probably see it happening now.
Right.
Everything that we can constitute the human quality of a human being is pretty much almost like hard to find. What you're seeing now walking in the streets, I wouldn't qualify as human. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it feels very robotic. And I want to ask, we're talking about some really dark stuff. Is it possible that we're also growing consciously, though? Because I do see an explosion in that area that seems to be this counterbalance to the darkness that's been unleashed upon the earth. So how do you see that, the concept of consciousness expanding and us becoming closer to source as we move further to 2012?
Well, you see, in order to have correct spiritual development, and this is particularly a strong message that America needs to listen, because America has fallen short of what I'm going to say, and that is that spiritual development is not just purely anabolic, meaning that it's not always about acquiring and being in an acquisitive mode, because really that's no better than a materialism. The man who wants the beautiful wife, the swimming pool, the Mercedes car, and a good job, and a yacht, and holidays in the Bahamas, we look at that person as a preposterous narcissist, a materialist, whatever. In the spiritual sense, a lot of what we're doing is very much the same. We're still in a very masculine, acquisitive mode. We're not in good relationship to ourselves. We're not in good relationship to our children. We have very little connection, spurious connection to nature. We have a spurious connection to animals, and most importantly, and as I brought this up in the talk I did in Los Angeles, which again was called 2012, The Future of Mankind, and I mentioned this at the end, when we were having the questions and answers. We are very much out of touch with what I would call the inanimate, which is actually ultimately a misnomer, because there is no such thing as inanimate. There's nothing dead in the universe. But what we would call the inanimate around us, the light, the ocean, the trees, the wind, the changing of the seasons, all of these things that man has become totally divorced for. And this pushes man to the surface of himself. And all his spiritual aspirations tend to be quite masculine, acquisitive, and what would be called yang. They're not yin, they're yang. So this is past for spiritual attainment. In fact, we even call it attainment, getting the light, going to God, having, getting, wanting, needing. Hey, God, I'm empty, fill me. This kind of is what is past for spiritual life. It happens in our relationships. I'm empty, I need you, you're empty, you need me. Great, we call it relationship. But in true spiritual teachings, in Taoism, in Zen, the understanding is that there's also a catabolic action, which is astrologically, incidentally, represented by Pluto. This is why this is so fascinating, because I agree with you, there is going to be an awakening. There is a greater magic underneath the sorcery. But first we've got to get clear on what constitutes true spiritual development. True spiritual development is not just going like into a gym and pumping iron till it hurts. That's good for a gym. That's not good for spiritual development. And anybody who really knows about spirituality, anyone who's really studied martial arts, anyone who's really studied Taoism or Zen gets around this. Anybody who's really studied the philosophies of Bruce Lee and Krishnamurti, you see, will get a handle on what I'm talking about. And that is it's catabolic. In order to ascend, you need to remove the dead weight from your life. In order to have that hot air balloon go up, you've got to remove the chains or remove any impediments that stand in its way. This requires a different kind of thinking, a catabolic, deconstructive type of thinking that Americans are not used to. And it's nothing bad. I'm just saying that now America had the cycle. We've been through the cycle of acquisition, of believing in Big Daddy and thinking every guru with crossed leg, burning some incense and put up an ashram, he's going to give you something that you can only bring from inside yourself. I think now the mist is clearing, the incense is clearing. There's been so much abuse from these goons anyway. I'm thinking hopefully, finally now, this hippy-dippy, ashram hugging, sitting under the mushroom, fake pseudo-shamanistic nonsense is passing away, and people can stand up on their own two legs and go, I am my own priest, I am my own priestess. I don't require any other teacher. Those people are only signposts anyway. I need to start taking responsibility for myself and walking the path. And part of that path is, yes, attaining, but also it's catharsis, it's letting go, it's deconstruction, it's abstinence. And there's a lot that needs to be let go. And as I say, America and most of the West has not been very good with this. So this yin approach, this understanding that there is a building up and there's a breaking down. There's a Shiva and there is a Shakti. There's a Nagwal and there's a Tonal. There is a yin and there is a yang. There's a prolific and there's a devouring, you see. Depends what school you're coming from, but the rhetoric is there, the information is there. There's this two-way street. And it's not just grabbing, owning, having, wanting, desiring, and begging some external force for what you don't have inside. The world is never going to turn you on. The world is never going to give you meaning. I mean, it does when you're a teenager and, you're tuned into the stimuli of the world. But you see, ultimately, meaning does not come from the world to you. Meaning comes from within yourself to the world. Now, we're surrounded by people who have not, cannot, and never will be able to give meaning to the world that they're living in. Face the facts. That's just the way it is. Too bad. But we have another group of people who can, in fact, when they get, savvy to this, start realizing this. And that it is not endless experiences that need to be fresh and new. It is the mind of the experiencer that needs to be fresh and new. It's not enlightenment in a sense of luminescence. It is enlightenment in a sense of lightness, like that hot air balloon, like the Fool card in the tarot.
In other words, Michael,
right? There's different kinds of lightness. There's different kinds of attainment. And so it's not about you trying to grab on to the mystery and hug it. It's more about allowing that mystery to embrace you. But that requires you to be very feminine. That requires you to change your mode of thinking and attitude and behavior. It means that you've got to let go of your fears. It means you've got to let go of the need and the desire. See, it's like, I give a metaphor sometimes of a person who's in a boat, like, Goofy, like the Disney character Goofy, rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing on this river. He's trying to go upstream, and all the time the great river is taking him exactly where he needs to go. So the idea of spirituality that's been loose in the world from pretty much the 1960s and before, and you could even track this right back to the beginning of all Orthodox religion, is Anthony Robbins' pump it till it hurts. And I'm hoping that people now realize that works, in a material sphere, or works in bodybuilding or whatever. It certainly has no total validity in spiritual development. It's totally about throwing away the oars. What the message of the next 4 years to those who are going to become light, and that's to say, not necessarily in a luminescent way, but in a way that is to do with weight.
Yeah.
spiritually, emotionally, morally light, which is true enlightenment, by the way, and let the river carry you. Well, you can't do that while you got the oars and you're going around like this goofy, rowing and rowing and rowing. The spiritual essence, the Zen way, is to throw away the oars, and of course that is very difficult for those aggressive, acquisitive, sadistic, self-sadistic, masochistic, and basically lost and confused people. They are not able to do that because they're in their ego, and the ego is the boat, the ego is the oars, and they feel that they know where their direction is, and that's okay. Let them do it. We don't have the right to go and try and seize those oars from those people. We don't have the right to go and interfere with them in any way whatsoever. If that's what they want to do, and they want to stay in those whirlpools, if that is their choice, that's what they need to do. But the rest of us can understand, wait a minute, the great river.
Michael, we're about out of time.
It's going to take a...
Michael, we're about out of time in about 2 minutes' time. And what you were going into was very, very interesting, and it needs to be talked about more. It's less adding more stuff onto ourselves to make us whole, but the chipping away at what needs to be removed so we can be light. And so that's a real clear way of articulating that. But in the last minute and a half that we have, what would you like to leave us with? I understand that anything can happen now at any time. Things are moving very, very fast, and we need to the best of our ability, not panic and not be afraid.
Exactly. You basically put it into a nutshell, is throw away the oars, keep on researching what's going on, keep on discovering, have a healthy interest in humanity and what's happening to humanity, and in this great, conflict between the forces of light and darkness, or I call it sorcery against the magic. Observe it, be involved in it, feel deeply for it, feel deeply for it philosophically. Be there, be in the world, and understand what is going on. But rather than see it as something that's a nightmare, see it as something that's more of an adventure. You're meant to be here. Everyone who's here on this planet at this time is meant to be here for a reason. And it is a conflict between magic and sorcery, and we are being, what's happening now is a sort of a situation in which we're getting to choose whether we choose that sorcery, and we want to be possessed by that, or we want to be possessed, by the magic, the deeper and the higher magic that exists, in which these sorcerers have no knowledge of and they can never touch in their lives. That is what is really going on. That's what's behind all of this stuff that's happening in the in the economic and social sphere. We're bringing it into being because there's incredible inner changes taking place on the deepest level, both genetics, as you said earlier, and also psychologically, because basically they're the same thing. Genetics is just an expression of our thinking, of our psychology. The changes are in consciousness, Alex, not in politics.